Welcome to Central Park. My name is Jose. I work as a guide for the Central Park Conservancy. So on behalf of everyone here at the Conservancy, we'd like to welcome you all on this members walk. We'd also like to sincerely thank you for your generous support. So whether you're a longtime contributor or whether you're a new member. Now more than ever, the park relies on you. So today we'll be taking a walk through the southeast corner of Central Park, and we'll look at the history of this area and focus on the hard work done by the Conservancy over the decades. Our virtual tour for today will be around 35 to 40 minutes or so. Now, many of the modern photographs you'll be seeing today were either taken by myself these last few weeks, or they were taken from our official Conservancy archives. You'll also see a number of historical images, and these were taken from the Library of Congress, the New York Public Library, the New York Historical Society, and the Museum of the City of New York. Right now, however, let's talk about housekeeping. So all participants are muted, but you can use the chat feature to say hello and comment. If you have any questions or comments or anything like that, you can also use the Q&A feature. My colleague Juan is going to be on the back end, and he's going to be answering any questions as we go along. So let's go ahead and get started. And here we have one of our world famous aerial images of Central Park, which of course a lot of you are really quite familiar with. So the virtual walk that we're going to be doing for today is meant to give you an introduction rather into the park's heavily trafficked yet often overlooked southeast corner. So we're going to be talking about its history, culture, ecology, and topography. To do that, we're going to go through some of its most famous landmarks. The area that we're going to explore was actually envisioned as a grand welcome into the distinct landscape of Central Park as early as the mid-19th century. Yet, as we'll see by the end of the tour, it still really is quite relevant today in the modern urban environment of New York City. Of course, just let us know down in the chat feature where you folks are coming from. I am expecting a lot of you are probably going to be coming from here in New York City, but you know, sometimes we get some surprises. So we'll get started right here on this slide. So we have the two images of these two gentlemen right here. So over on the left, this is going to be Frederick Law Olmsted. And over on the right-hand side, that of course is going to be Calvert Vaux. Many of us are aware of these two gentlemen right here. Basically, they were going to be the designers of Central Park. They created what's called the Greens Ward Plan, which is essentially this map right over here. So Vaux and Olmsted had actually drawn up the Greens Ward Plan, which was essentially the blueprint for Central Park. In 1857, work officially began, and it was mostly complete by the 1870s. So when it was finished, it spanned 51 blocks from north to south, from 59th Street all the way to 110th Street. And of course, it was 3 avenues wide, spanning from 5th Avenue over on the east, all the way to 8th Avenue, now called Central Park West. Today, the Greens Ward Plan is, of course, still is hailed as a significant and very much an influential document in landscape architecture. Now, the Greens Ward Plan actually called for several unique aspects to be built. So things like a concert ground, you had gardens, woodlands, and promenades. Overall, the design of the park gave an elegant but naturalistic character, almost as if it was one massive, very large English garden. So here in this really amazing image that we're looking at, this is going to be the park in the 1870s. So attracted by really highly romanticized images like these, New Yorkers really flocked here in droves during the early years. And since most of the population of the city at that point in time lived in the southern half of Manhattan, well below 14th Street, Many of these park goers most likely would have entered through one of the southern gates. So let's go ahead and follow in the footsteps right now. So this is going to be the map of our park, and as you can see here on the image, the big red dots, those are going to be the stops on our virtual tour and walk. So we're going to start off down here at the southeast corner at Scholars Gate around 60th Street, and we're going to talk about Doris Friedman Plaza. Then we'll make our way a bit south to the monument of Grand Army Plaza, and from there we'll make our way into the stone walls of Central Park towards the pond. Then we'll hit Gapstow Bridge, Wollman Rink, and then finally we'll make it up to the Children's District of Central Park, and we're going to talk about the Chess and Checkers House, the Kinderberg, and finally the Dairy. So we're going to start our member walk right here over at Scholars Gate, right near 60th Street and 5th Avenue. So this, if you're not familiar, this is actually one of the original gates bringing people into Central Park. And this, of course, is called Scholars Gate. This is, of course, located close to where the park's East Drive meets the commercial bustle of Midtown Manhattan and the more residential Upper East Side neighborhood. So it can get quite busy here. Just like the Columbus Circle entrance just a few blocks away, this corner really is quite a popular gateway into Central Park, just as it was in the 19th century. So let's go ahead and actually make our way right inside of, right through Scholars Gate right now. But first, let's go ahead and actually take a look very closely at the wall itself. So Vox and Olmsted, they designed Central Park essentially to be an oasis away from the urban landscape of Manhattan. So what they did was they constructed a stone wall around its perimeter. To provide public entry into the park, they created these gates. And of course, in order to differentiate between the different entrances, the Board of Commissioners in 1862 decided to name each one after different groups that would represent the people of the city of New York. So there are going to be 20 of these entrances, and they have names like Artist Gate, Engineers Gate, and Mariners Gate. You'll also see gates like Merchants Gate, Strangers Gate, and Women's Gate. To me, it really does speak on the democratic nature of Central Park. Literally everyone belongs here. And of course, if you do live near a certain gate, you can let us know in the comments or tell us which one is your favorite. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make our way into the actual gate now. So if we take a peek north through Scholars Gate, we're going to be able to see Ween Walk. The pathway itself actually leads straight into Central Park Zoo, and it's one of the more heavily used walkways into the park. Now, the benches that you see on either the left or the right-hand side of us usually is going to be filled with lots and lots of folks from all different walks of life. Sometimes you'll see street performers, artists, and of course, photographers. So this particular walk, this was named after Lawrence Ween, whose family donated money to restore this area in his honor. If you don't know who Lawrence Ween was, he was, of course, a graduate of Columbia University. And if you're familiar with that campus, then you know that there are, of course, going to be numerous buildings and facilities named after him, such as the football stadium over at Inwood. So we're going to take a step back in time a little bit. So this is actually Ween Walk from the 1970s, well before the Conservancy restored it. So notice the shabby fencing, the lack of benches. So compare that to how it looks today, and it just really is kind of a tremendous and really amazing transformation. This, of course, is all thanks to the Conservancy, as well as the members that help fund the Conservancy. Now, immediately south of Scholars Gate, we come to Ween Walk, or rather not Ween Walk, to Doris Friedman Plaza. Since 1978, this plaza has hosted temporary works of art by numerous artists such as Jean Dubuffet, Louise Nevelson, and Isamu Noguchi. These usually are here for just a few months at a time, and they serve to exhibit the talents of both local and internationally renowned artists. Currently, the exhibit that we're looking at right here, this is by the New York City-based artist Sam Moyer, and it's entitled Doors for Doris. And if you're wondering who the Doris here is, this is going to be her right here. So the plaza was actually dedicated in 1981 by Mayor Ed Koch to Doris Friedman, who had passed away earlier that year. She was actually quite a tireless advocate for public art in New York City. And as the city's very first director of cultural affairs, she founded what's called the Public Art Fund. She believed that works of art should belong not just in museums, but out on the streets where it can confront us on our way to work or on our daily errands. And that way it can become a special component of our daily lives. So we're gonna go ahead and continue on with our tour. And as you can see, we're moving south away from Doris Friedman Plaza. And we're now making our way into Grand Army Plaza. Now, if we walk the crosswalk right here, we come to the next stop on our tour. And this, of course, is the Grand Army Plaza, and I think it's really quite an appropriate name for it. So it was actually envisioned as a really quite stately entrance into Central Park, and we'll see that in a bit as we encounter grand monuments, as well as quite an opulent fountain. As you can see in this aerial image, the plaza is actually two plazas in one. So it's going to span from 58th Street all the way to 60th Street. And right in the center, that is going to be 59th Street. Originally, it was quite a modest plaza with a tree-lined design. And it was first proposed by the Austrian-born sculptor Karl Bitter in the Beaux-Arts style in 1898. The plaza was built in the first decade of the 20th century during what's called the City Beautiful movement. And at that point in time, cities across the country, including New York, began to adorn their streets with very opulent European-style architecture, monuments, and grand statues. Now, the northern half of Grand Army Plaza contains the Sherman Monument, and it's often regarded as a masterpiece by the sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens. So he actually worked on it for at least a decade, and he finally completed it in 1903. It was dedicated in May of that year, and as you can see, it's actually gilded in 24-karat gold. The monument itself showcases the military aspect of this very opulent public space. So it depicts the Union General William Tecumseh Sherman perched on the back of his horse Ontario as he's being led by Nike, who is of course the Roman goddess of victory. Now, General Sherman played a key role in the defeat of the Confederacy during the Civil War with his capture of Atlanta in 1864, as well as his subsequent march to Savannah. And of course, here he is during that campaign. After the war, Sherman actually moved to New York, and he lived out the rest of his days in relative peace and quiet. And he would often be seen riding the bridle trail of Central Park. So yeah, he was actually a park regular. Now, leading Sherman to victory, as I've mentioned, is going to be the Roman goddess Nike. The model for Nike was Hetty Anderson, who often worked with St. Gaudens on numerous projects. Now, as part of the restoration of Grand Army Plaza, the Conservancy organized a very comprehensive treatment on the monument in 2015. So the project included regilding the monument and applying a new protective coating, as well as repairs to the monument's base. So it really was quite a task, but in the end, it actually paid off quite handsomely. So you can actually see the difference here. So this is what it would have looked like before the restoration, and this is it right after. So look how the grandeur of the statue literally shines after it was restored. Of course, all this would not be possible without the contribution of members like you. So thank you very much, everyone. So we're going to continue on with the walk, and now we head a little bit further south from the Sherman Monument, and now we explore the other side of Grand Army Plaza. At the southern half of the plaza sits the Pulitzer Fountain. So you can actually see the granite basin right down here at the bottom. It's actually carrying a bronze sculpture that represents Pomona, the Roman goddess of abundance, as she carries a basket of fruit. I think it's really quite appropriate, I think, just because it symbolizes much of the wealth surrounding Grand Army Plaza, Midtown, and New York City in general. So Pulitzer Fountain is named, of course, after newspaper mogul Joseph Pulitzer, who left around $50,000 in his will after his death in 1911 to fund its completion. The base of the fountain was designed by Thomas Hastings, while the Pomona statue itself was sculpted by Carl Bitter and Isidore Conti, both of whom were actually immigrants from Austria-Hungary. Now, the whole Grand Army Plaza was intended to look very similar to what's called the Place de la Concorde in Paris. Here we see an illustration from that city around the turn of the century, which showcases its famous fountains and obelisk. So you can definitely see where much of the influence of this area actually comes from. So we are moving on with our walk, and as you can see on the map, we're now just making our way inside the stone walls around the park. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and kind of cross the street and head west from Grand Army Plaza. And on the left, we can see Central Park North. We're gonna go ahead and actually make a right turn here, and we're gonna head towards one of the gates. So you'll notice here that there's a quite highly elaborate lamppost. So this is actually very much unlike the other street lamps around it. So before we actually head inside the park proper, let's go ahead and examine this beautiful, wonderful curiosity. So this is what's called the Lombard lamp, and it was donated by the city of Hamburg in 1979 as a bridge of friendship with New York City. It was designed by the artist Karl Borner, and the lamppost itself is 15 feet high, and it contains 5 spherical lamps up at the top. Its frame is actually hollow, believe it or not, but it weighs in at more than 1,300 pounds. And here you can see a close-up of the base, and it features designs like garlands and cherubim. Over the summer, the lamp was actually restored by us here at the Conservancy. So what we did was we actually gave it a brand new coating of black paint, and that actually ensures, of course, its protection from the elements for several more years to come. So we're moving on with the walk, and from the Lombard lamp, we're gonna go ahead and make our way inside of the walls of the park. And as soon as we step in, we see one of the golf carts that we here at the Conservancy use to go around the park and do daily cleaning and general maintenance. You'll pretty much see them all over the place. Even throughout the pandemic this year, our crews were out in full force in the park, picking up trash, removing graffiti, and fixing up benches and things like that. So let's go ahead and make our way down these steps. And as we do so, we actually enter a world that can feel like miles away from the hustle and bustle of New York City. Now, when Vox and Olmsted first stepped foot in this southern end of what was to become Central Park, they discovered that it was mostly swampy, it was very low-lying, and it was, of course, very rocky as well. They also realized that there was an entire community of people living here, and it was called Pigtown, and it was primarily immigrant Irish. It was named for its abundance of pig farms. It was said that the smells from these farms could permeate for miles. So in total, there were about 1,600 people living within the boundaries of the pre-park landscape, including several hundred uptown at Seneca Village. Now, to make way for Central Park, all 1,600 plus folks were actually evicted by 1857. Now, as we walk towards our next stop, you'll notice that these big, massive rocky outcroppings all over the place. So these rocks are what's called Manhattan schist. And this type of metamorphic rock can be found pretty much all throughout the borough, as many of us New Yorkers are quite aware of. So these rocks beneath New York City are really quite old. They range in age from anywhere from about 190 million years up to 1.1 billion years old. So these are some very, very, very old rocks. And they are, of course, really quite tough as well. It's, of course, one reason why Vox and Olmsted decided to integrate them into the park landscape as opposed to just blasting right through them. Further down the promenade we go, and if we look over towards our left, we can see this beautiful image of the pond. So the pond was actually built over marshland and a small stream that actually emptied out into the East River. And preserving some of this natural topography, Vox and Olmsted utilized the rocky outcroppings of Manhattan schist to essentially frame the pond. Like all bodies of water in Central Park, the pond itself is actually entirely artificial. So while it may look like it's always been part of the landscape, it's actually fed by pipes such as these that use the same water that comes out of our faucets. So these pipes are usually very cleverly hidden behind rocks and shrubs, but if you can actually spot them while walking around the pond, then you'll know exactly what they're used for. The Central Park Conservancy restored the pond back in 2001, and during that project, what we did was we entirely drained the whole thing, and new native plantings as well as brand new rocks and things like that were added to the shoreline to make it seem much more natural. So this is going to be an image of the pond from right before the restoration process, and you can see just how different that really is now. So you can see that the shoreline back then was looking quite barren and really not very inviting at all. Here's another pre-restoration photo, and you can see just how dead the plants are over here. And of course, if you lived in New York City throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, then you know exactly just how these images really are quite shocking. And this was pretty much what the park looked like for quite a long time before the Conservancy stepped in and cleaned it all up. Now, since 2001, the pond has seen much better days, so it's been much more natural looking. So these days, the pond can be quite a peaceful retreat, just as Vox and Olmsted would have intended. So nowadays, it's pretty much surrounded by lush vegetation all along its shoreline, and you can find trees like crab apples, yews, bald cypresses, and Japanese maples. During the restoration, we also added a small island over on the western shore of the pond for wildlife habitat, as well as a series of pools and cascades around that area. And here we can see some of the black-eyed Susans that kind of serve to complement the pond's tranquility. I took these images about a month ago, and I'm not quite sure if the black-eyed Susans are still around, but I'm kind of expecting them to be. So here we see this lovely, beautiful egret. As many of us know, the pond is, of course, a place that serves as a home for quite a lot of wildlife. So you'll often see turtles here, ducks, herons, and of course, egrets. A wide variety of other birds can also be spotted here as well, just because it sits right next to the Hallett Nature Sanctuary, which is one of the 3 woodlands of Central Park and a popular bird watching area. The Conservancy, of course, recently just opened up the Nature Sanctuary just within the last few years, after literally decades of being overgrown and unmanaged. So now we walk a little further up the pathway along the pond's eastern shoreline, and eventually we come to Gapstow Bridge. So this bridge is made out of Manhattan schist, which is the same stone that's below the ground here in New York and in Central Park. So during the warmer months, you'll find that the bridge is going to be covered in vines, which gives it a lovely natural quality that makes it fit in well with the rest of its surroundings. So this is actually one of the most popular and well-known spans in Central Park, as we all know. It's been featured in films like Home Alone 2 and Enchanted, as well as books like Catcher in the Rye. It was built in 1896 by the architectural firm Howard and Caldwell. And this is actually newer than most of the other bridges and arches in Central Park, believe it or not. So the original bridge would have looked something like this. This was constructed more than 20 years prior in 1874, and it was designed by Jacob Ray Mould, who worked as Calvert Vaux's assistant, and he also created numerous other works that can be found throughout Central Park, like other bridges and arches as well. Now, this older incarnation of Gapstow Bridge was made out of wood with cast iron railings. Unfortunately, it started to deteriorate within a few weeks, or rather within a few years, and it was eventually torn down. The current stone structure then replaced it by the 1890s. What I find really fascinating about this particular image that I'm showing you folks is going to be the swan boat that you see over on the left hand side. Of course, the pond does not have any more swan boats. They were pretty much in use only up until about 1924. Now, like much of Central Park in the past, Gapstow Bridge has seen some pretty rough times as well. So this is from just a few decades ago. Since the pond was restored, it's been looking much more naturalistic and charming. So the pathway over on the left, I don't know if you can see it. This actually doesn't even exist here anymore. It's now occupied by shoreline plantings. It really does kind of fascinate me just how much the Conservancy has rehabilitated Central Park throughout the decades. So let's make our way onto the top of Gapstow Bridge now. The views from this bridge really can be quite stunning. So just looking south from this angle, and you'll catch a glimpse of the super tall structures that are currently in construction. And if we look over towards our left, we can see another incredible view. So this one, you can see the pond front and center. In the background, you can see Midtown, and right in the center, that of course is going to be the Plaza Hotel. These days, the Plaza Hotel is pretty much dwarfed by the buildings around it. But in the 1890s, it would have been the tallest structure in the area. So it really shows you just how much New York City, the skyline of New York really has changed over the decades. Okay, so we're moving swiftly along now, and we continue north up the promenade from Gapstow Bridge. And as you can see on the map, we made quite a bit of progress on our tour so far. And our next stop is going to be Wollman Rink. Now, along the way to Wollman Rink on the promenade heading north, we get to pass by a nice variety of trees that represent just a few of the many different types of trees that can be found here in Central Park. Here we can actually see two conifers on the left and right hand side of us. Over on the left, this is going to be an eastern white pine, and over on the right hand side, this is going to be a yew tree. In the background, you might be able to pick out several other trees as well. So a London plane, red oak, and a linden tree. In total, there's going to be about 20,000 trees here in Central Park, making it an essential oasis of greenery within the city. So if you think about places like the Ramble, the North Woods, this essentially serves as the lungs of New York City. All right, so just a few steps from where we're standing right here, we will now arrive at Wollman Rink. So Wollman Rink would have opened up in 1950. It was opened up with a donation from the philanthropist Kate Wollman, and it was named in honor of her family. It's important to note that for several decades in the 20th century, this is actually one of the two Wollman Rinks that you can find here in New York City. The other one could be found in Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and that one, unfortunately, recently just shut down in 2010. Now, every winter since the 19th century, Central Park has accommodated thousands of ice skaters. So long before the construction of Wollman Rink in 1950, New Yorkers have flocked here to the park to enjoy its frozen water surfaces. So while the pond has seen its own fair share of ice skating, traditionally, ice skating has been associated with the lake, another body of water that's located just a little bit further up the park. So this image that we're looking at, this is actually a Thomas Nast cartoon. This is from 1864. And we can see just how popular ice skating was at that point in time. Back when the lake first opened up to the public in December of 1858, it brought in nearly 20,000 enthusiastic ice skaters during that season. Nowadays, most of the park's main water bodies rarely freeze over. And since the mid-20th century, ice skating now happens at either of the two official rinks. So there's going to be Alaska Rink as well as Wollman Rink. So this is, of course, going to be an iconic winter activity in New York. Sometimes it brings in thousands of visitors on a single winter day. Of course, it's often featured as a backdrop in a number of films and television shows. So among those are going to be Serendipity and Gossip Girl. Of course, during the summer, Wollman Rink usually attracts park goers in a number of other ways as well. And since 2003, it's usually transformed into an amusement park called Victorian Gardens, complete with carnival rides, food stalls, clowns, and even magic shows, which unfortunately we weren't able to do this year because of the pandemic. In previous decades, the Wollman Rink site has also served as a home for live entertainment during the summer months. In fact, during the 1960s and throughout the 1970s, it was the site of the what's called the Schaefer Music Festival. The Schaefer Music Festival was one of the more prominent of the many different concert series here in this area, and it featured performances by folks like Jimi Hendrix, Carly Simon, Led Zeppelin, Ike and Tina Turner, and many, many, many more. The image that we're looking at, this is actually from 1973, and it actually features Judy Collins in front of a packed audience. So we move on north to what's called the Children's District of Central Park. And generally, it includes most of the attractions within this roughly 30-acre rectangle that I've put up here on the image. Now, the Children's District was created by Vox and Olmsted essentially as a haven for younger visitors. And here the park designers built facilities that would specifically cater to them and their caregivers. The Children's District historically included things like the dairy, and you also would have found the boys' playground here as well. So this engraving is going to be from the 1870s, and it depicts that historic boys' playground. So it's not exactly a playground in the modern sense, so you're not going to find any slides here or swings or anything like that. Rather, it referred to an open grassy area where boys would be able to play games like baseball or cricket. These days, of course, the playgrounds are going to be much more different. So you'll actually see playground equipment like slides, swings, and things like that. And of course, it welcomes more than just boys. You can find boys and girls here as well. Okay, so we're continuing on with the tour. The pathway that we see right here is going to take us from the low-lying area of Wollman Rink up to the small rocky outcrop called the Kinderberg. So right up this pathway is going to be our next stop. Here we have what's called the Kinderberg. So historically, it's going to be located it's going to be essentially a big chunk of Manhattan schist. If you know any Dutch or German, then you know that Kinderberg translates literally to Children's Hill, which is quite an appropriate name for it since we are, of course, in the Children's District. As you can see here in the image, it even had steps that would invite kids to play on it. And perched right on top of the Kinderberg is going to be the Chess and Checkers house. So let's go ahead and make our way there right now. So it was built in 1952 with a donation by the financier and the presidential advisor Bernard Baruch. And this is one of the newer additions to the Children's District. Today it now houses one of the official visitor centers of the Central Park Conservancy. So of course, this is what it's going to look like from the inside. Unfortunately, it is still closed due to the pandemic. And usually during when it is open, you can play chess and checkers here, as well as other types of board games as well. And if it's a nice day out, you can also use one of the 24 chess tables that surround the building. So providing shade right above these chess tables, you're going to find a very large pergola, which actually follows the outline of an original rustic wooden structure that once was here in the 19th century. And this is what it's going to look like back then. So this rustic wooden summer house was built in 1866. At that point in time, it was the largest such structure in Central Park. It was meant really as a way for kids as well as their families to kind of relax and kind of cool off away from the hot summer sun. It really was quite beautifully designed and exceptionally detailed. Unfortunately, because it was made out of wood, it started to deteriorate quite quickly, and it was eventually torn down by the 1940s. It was then replaced by the current structure. Okay, so as you can see here on the map, we're heading down the stairs of the Kinderberg, and we take a few short steps and make our way over towards the next and last stop on our tour, and this is going to be the dairy. So just outside the front entrance, you can find this beautiful wooden loggia that allows visitors to enjoy the fresh air and views of the pond to the south, as well as providing shelter during times of rain. Currently, the whole structure is under the early stages of a major restoration. The project is going to involve repairing its open-air porch and the exterior masonry, replacing and waterproofing the roof, and adding an accessible entrance. So we here at the Conservancy, we expect it to be completed by at some point next year in 2021. Now, this building initially was built in 1871 with a design by Calvert Vaux. As you can see, the neo-Gothic design was intended to evoke a sort of fairy tale-like atmosphere in the children's district. It included a steep pitched roof. You can see church-like windows, and of course, the spire as well. So it was actually constructed as a refreshment stand where families would be able to buy snacks and fresh, clean milk for children. This was especially important in the mid-19th century, as New York City at that point in time was still coming out of what's called the swill milk scandal of the 1850s. During the swill milk scandal, thousands of children, mostly toddlers and infants, died from milk that was actually adulterated by local dairy farmers with things like plaster of Paris. Just as soon as the dairy opened up, however, officials from Tammany Hall, who are now running Central Park, they decided to turn the structure into a more profitable restaurant, complete with, guess what, a bar. Now, that restaurant was in use until the 1950s, at which point the building saw a major decline. It became really nothing more than just a park maintenance shed, and as we can see here in this image from the 1970s, the once beautiful loggia was eventually torn down. The entire building itself was closed off altogether by the time of the financial crisis in the 1970s. The building began to see quite a revival by 1979 when its interior was restored. And of course, the Central Park Conservancy was formed in 1980. By the following year, in one of our very first projects, we rebuilt the loggia with the help of old photographs. And of course, fast forward to the present day, and the restored dairy has never looked better. So we end off our tour here. And I want you folks to kind of consider all the things that have made this part of Central Park so special. Consider as well all the hard work that goes into maintaining and preserving this section of Central Park, as well as all the other sections of the park. As a nonprofit group, the Central Park Conservancy, we get the majority of our funding from the generosity of members like you. So without your support, Central Park really would not be in the pristine state that it would be in for today. So we thank you all so much for visiting the park. So there are a number of ways that you can still stay connected. You can just go to centralpark.nyc.org/mycentralpark. And of course, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, I'm going to leave the room open for a few minutes, and we can grab any last questions, or we can just kind of talk. So until then, from the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe and be well.